Today's lecture is a follow-up to the lecture on markets for factors of production under perfect competition. Today we're going to be talking about imperfect competition in hiring labor. We could have imperfect competition from the standpoint of the employer. If you have only one employer, then that would be a monopsony. That's going to be one of the topics of today's lecture. Or else you could have workers that are united in a labor union, and that, of course, is also going to give them power over the wage that they're going to be earning. So let's start with a definition of a monopsony. Monopsony is, as we just said, one employer, and therefore the employer has a lot of power over the wage that they are going to be paying. The idea is that if you are the only game in town, you are going to try and keep the wage rate as low as possible to employ the number of workers that you need. If you need more workers, you will have to increase the wage rate. Now, not only will you increase the wage rate to the newly hired workers, but also to the previously hired workers so that they don't leave. And as a result, the cost of hiring the extra worker is going to be higher than just the wage rate, because it will also include the increase in the cost of the raise that you have to give all the previously hired workers. As a result, you are going to have a supply curve and a marginal factor cost curve. So here we see that your supply curve represents all the workers who would be willing to work at the different wage rates. So obviously, if the wage rate is very low, very few people will be happy or will be willing to work. As the wage rate goes up, more people, the quantity increases, as in most supply cases. But the interesting part is that here your marginal factor cost curve is going to be steeper than your supply curve, because it will represent the increase in the cost of hiring. And again, it is going to show not only the wage that you pay the extra worker, but also the raise that you have to give the previous workers. So here again we have a table, and that would represent a monopsony. How? Because you can see that the wage rate goes up when the employer would like to hire more people. So the total cost, assuming that labor is the only cost, will be the quantity of labor times the wage rate at every level of employment. Now, the marginal factor cost will be the change in total cost divided by the change in quantity of units hired. Here we made it simple, we just added one by one. So your marginal factor cost for unit 5 cannot be calculated because we don't know what it was before, but we can calculate the marginal factor cost of hiring worker number 6. And so although you are paying $9 to the 6th worker, the cost goes up by 14, and that would be the fact that you have the $9 for worker number 6, plus you have $5, and that would be the raise to the previously hired 5 workers at $8 apiece. So now you have 5 times 1, because you gave them an extra $1, that's your 5, and the 9 is the cost of worker number 6. So as you can see, the marginal factor cost is going to be a higher number than your wage rate. So coming back to right here, you could see that if you're hiring worker number 7, then the marginal factor cost, the wage is going to be $10, but the marginal factor cost would be much higher based on that particular table. The table that we looked at before that would therefore have to be for 7, $16, while $10 was only the cost of hiring worker number 7. So what is it that we are trying to figure out here? What is it that we're trying to achieve? One more time, we're trying to achieve maximum profits in hiring workers. And that will happen where the marginal revenue product, right here, that's the line, the same line that you had in the previous chapter. This is also going to be your demand curve for labor. The marginal revenue product is equal to your marginal factor cost. So here, when they do cross, that determines the number of workers we are going to be hiring, while the wage that you will pay will be determined by the supply curve. Because if you only wanted 7 workers to work for you, then all you need to do is offer $10, and only 7 workers will be happy to work for you. Now, what if you offered $16? Well, if you offered $16, then you see about 10 workers would want to work for you. But what happens if you hire 10 workers? Well, the revenue from hiring the 10th worker is lower than the wage that you are paying them. Now, if this is about, let's say, 14, how about we do that, 15, then that would be more like 14 right here. This, the marginal revenue product of the 10th worker, is $14, and you are paying them $16, then on that worker you are losing $2 because they cost you more than what they bring in. So we don't want to go to worker number 10. We only want to stick with 7 workers because that's where your profits will be the maximum. And at that point, you will only offer $10 to have 7 workers working for you. If you offered more, then as a result, you would be hiring, you would have more workers to choose from. We assume, of course, that all workers are equally productive and are contributing to their very best, but because of the law of diminishing returns, which is something that we covered in the previous chapter, then each subsequent worker beyond a certain high level of hiring will be contributing less and less. Not because they are less efficient, but because in conjunction with the others, they are able to contribute less, maybe because there's starting to be overcrowding and other consequences of having too large a team on your floor. So we have looked at the situation of a monopsonist, and now we would like to have a look at the market supply curve under perfect competition. When we looked at a monopsonist, the supply of labor was the supply of the whole labor force, because that was the only hiring possibility. An example of that would be, for instance, in a small town where there's a large mine, most of the employment is going to be relate to the mine itself. A few people are going to be working maybe in a restaurant, maybe in a grocery store, but most of the people there are going to be working in the mine. In today's world, this is less true because we have options in terms of transportation. If you live in Richmond, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be working for the refinery, because you can get into a car and drive to many other areas where other jobs than just the refinery are available. But that's what a monopsonist would be. So for a monopsonist, this is your supply curve. You as the individual employer are facing. For the individual employer under perfect competition, remember the supply of labor was a horizontal line, which was the marginal factor cost, and this this is the way it looked. You were a wage taker. Here, for instance, if we were to look at that under a situation of pure competition, well, then we're looking at all of the workers, all of the employees, and this is the demand for all of the employees. So how many people would be hired and at what wage rate if instead of having a monopsony we had pure competition? The answer is where supply and demand cross. So that would be right here. And here you see you would have more people hired and the wage rate would be higher. So if you argue for pure competition, you would say it would employ more people and it would offer a higher wage to their employees. So which curve would not exist if we were looking here at the pure competition situation? You would not have a marginal factor cost because that marginal factor cost would be a horizontal line for the individual employer. Now the next thing that we're going to look at is imperfect competition from the standpoint of employees, and that would be with respect to a labor union. A labor union would have two different aims. One aim would be to try and keep the wage rate as high as possible, and the other aim would be to have the incomes of their members as high as possible. So we could summarize the impact of a labor union in three different graphs with three different moves. So let's say that we are starting with the original demand for labor and the other original supply of labor. So that's the market situation, and this would be the number of workers hired, and this would be the wage rate. Now, one way that a union could impact the wage rate, remember they want to bring it up higher, is to reduce the supply of labor. And that's what we would call a craft union. And this would be like plumbers, electricians, and this will limit the amount of plumbers and electricians, members of a labor union, that would be available. As a result, you bring the price or the wage up to a higher wage. It is true that fewer people are going to be employed. So that's one way that unions are going to try and manipulate wage. The second one would be by bringing the demand curve for union labor out. You could do that by trying to promote using American-made products, because that would imply American labor having produced those goods. You could also make jobs highly specific and expect different people from different areas to be there simultaneously, kind of a doubling of effort. So let's say in a grocery store, some people in a unionized grocery store, some people are going to be checkers, others are going to be shelving the goods, others are going to be, delivering stuff. So now, if the rules say that you have to have both a checker and somebody who's going to be straightening out the shelves, then you have to have two people, because one person cannot do the job of the other person. And of course that increases the demand for labor, thereby bringing the wage up and increasing the demand for labor. But of course that also increases the cost of production for the company, the firm itself. Now the third way, right here, and that would be more of an industrial union. Like the AFL-CIO. And all they do is they do not manipulate the demand or the supply. All they are doing is just setting a particular wage. So they say, well, we will not work for less than, let's say, $30 an hour, and that will obviously be a wage that will be way above the equilibrium. If, in this situation, would there be a surplus or a shortage of labor? Well, the quantity demanded is like right here, and I'm running out of ink. Okay, so this is the quantity demanded right here, and this is the quantity supplied right there. This is a surplus. So now, generally speaking, if there is a surplus, then the wage or the price would have to come down in order to clear the market. So overall, this lecture deals with how to price factors of production. This will apply to other factors of production. We mainly use labor, since this is the largest component of the factors of production used. So here, when we're talking about imperfect competition, you could either have an employer, and that would be a monopsonist, or on the part of the employees, that would be a labor union. And the monopsonist is going to try and keep wages as low as possible, and it will only accept to pay higher wages in order to encourage more people to work for them if they need them. Okay? Because remember, they are maximizing profits, and they're going to try and hire the number of units that are going to be determined by the marginal revenue product and the marginal factor cost. Labor unions, on the other hand, will either impact the supply of labor or the demand for labor, or, as more often is happening, obviously just setting a particular wage. So thank you very much.